Hi, and welcome to this series. In this first video, we're going to build just one simple piece, but at the same time, we're also going to look at some of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing, why we aren't doing things in a different way, and just in general, kind of lay the groundwork for going forward. So I'm going to start here by building just a single piece, and as I do so, we'll talk about why I'm going to build it this way, and we'll actually look at some alternate things that you could do, and we'll discuss why we're not specifically doing them this time. So I'm going to start here with something at the origin, and I'm just going to punch in the actual dimensions here. So I know that my x and my z are 8 millimeters, and my y, the height, is 3.2 millimeters. So I'll put those in. I'm not going to give myself any segments here at the beginning. I am going to take the y position and move it up 1.6 millimeters just to set it up on top of the ground plane. And let's just center up on it. And there we go. So you can see there's the start of our little block. Now, one thing about these little toys is that there is this level of inner symmetry, kind of divisions of a 0.8 millimeter scale that kind of crop up everywhere, and we'll see those as we go on constructing here. We're going to be doing this with subdivision surfaces, so I guess the first thing you might ask is why subdivision surfaces instead of just making this polygonal, since it is pretty much polygonal. It's a cylinder with a square and then a hole in or a square-shaped hole in the bottom. So why are we going to do this way? Now, the reason that we're going to do this with symmetry, or excuse me, with subdivision surfaces, is that if we render this as is, you can look over at our render view here, we're going to end up with these gorgeous, sharp CGI corners that we came to know and love in decades past, but now we're getting to be able to move beyond. And move beyond is what we really want here. We want to be able to see, this soft beveling. And again, you might ask the question, why not just go into edge mode here and do a slight edge bevel? So why not do something like this? Here we get that same edge beveling, and we kind of get the effect. Now, the problem with this is that I did this at 4 levels of subdivision, which makes relatively dense corners. Obviously, you can go a lot more, but the closer in you get, this is going to look just chunky and not right. Plus, because of that faceting, you have to spend a lot of time messing with the smooth angles, and even then you're going to be missing some things that you would get out of a well done subdivision surface model. So let's undo that. Plus, we're going to have difficulties in getting nice flat surfaces that go from flat to rounded, as we do often on this kind of a model. So we're going to do these with subdivision surfaces. And we're going to do these, we're going to sharpen our edges using loop slices here. So obviously if I hit tab, this turns into an M&M, which is not what we want. So we'll just add in loop slices. And remember that with subdivision surfaces, set it to count of 2 in symmetry. Remember with subdivision surfaces, what we're looking for is a defining edge, or excuse me, an actual edge, and then a defining edge for each direction. So if I do 3 sets of defining edges, one for the X, one for the Y, and one for the Z, we can see that everything solidifies here. So if I go again over to my render view, you can see that, yeah, we're getting that rounding. Right now it's a little low. Our subdivision level could go up and improve the look of this. We will end up rendering with adaptive subdivision. So this subdivision level here will be largely irrelevant. As we start getting into larger scene sizes, we'll actually pull it down to something like that, subdivision level of 1, just to decrease the amount of geometry. For now, just the normal default subdivision level of 2 will do the trick, so we'll just leave it there as we get started. And there's the general block of the form. Now, we could have done this with edge weighting, but the problem we get with edge weighting is that sometimes it's harder to get more gradiated transitions. And the other thing is, if we're going to export to another application, edge weighting is pretty problematic in getting into another app. However, this kind of thing, adding in the loop slices, is always going to give you good solid geometry that will transfer into other applications, and also works very well going from low poly to high poly. Okay, so there's the general shape here. Now we need this circular piece in the middle. And the size of this is, well, we have a 1.6 millimeter gap on either side. So that's going to give us a total of 3.2 millimeters on total coming across here. So our diameter here is going to be 4.8 millimeters. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do this in a new mesh layer here to start. And anytime I can take an option to illustrate something that can be used in other applications, I'm pretty much going to do it. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to make myself a 4.8 millimeter cylinder here. And actually it'll be 2.4 in each direction because that's the radius. And I want to make sure it is centered up at 0 on the X. But I want this to be right up here. So that's looking at 3.2 millimeters on the Y. So it's going to sit up on top. Okay, and for a number of sides, segments we don't want any or just one. A number of sides, we're actually going to do 12 sides. And the reason for that is that we want this to be able to match up to the amount of sides for the hole that we're going to cut for it on our main body of our brick here. So, and just to, sometimes we end up with things that aren't quite right. So let's say, just for example, I had this at 3.25 millimeters of height. What I'm going to do here, and this will be more necessary in later steps, so I'll introduce it here. Let's go ahead and subdivide this. And I'm going to turn my snapping to geometry, constraint to background. Then I'm going to make sure that my geometry constraint is set to vector. Now if I just use my move tool, I can just pull that down and it's going to align exactly. Like I said, that will be more important in places where we know, here we know it's exactly 3.2 millimeters up. In other cases we might not know exactly, or it might be a curved surface or something like that, or an angle. So we want to be able to align that. That's pretty much a pretty standard way of doing that. So let's go ahead and take that and, oops, actually we don't want to cut that out yet. We want to prepare the hole for it first. And I could just take it and do a four-sided one and insert it into here, but we're going to end up with some real heavy faceting around the edges, and it's going to take a lot more for the subdivision surfaces to make it look good. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run loop slices through here. I'm going to keep my count to 2, but I'm just going to click the uniform button, and that's going to draw through 2 edges on each one. Now I can click this top one, shift up arrow, and cut. Now we have a perfect hole to go into. So let's go cut this one out, paste it into here, and now I'll select this edge by double clicking, and this edge, and run the bridge tool. Now one thing you'll notice is that we get this kind of swirling effect, and that's because the circle, and let's unsubdivide here, the circle has points at the midsection of each edge, whereas the square, it's 3 even divisions, so there's an edge here instead of a point. So we could have done this before, we can do it now. I'm just going to grab this and I'm going to rotate, and I'm going to hold down the control key before I click and drag, and that's going to snap me to 15-degree increments. And it just happens with 12 segments, 15 degrees is going to be half of a rotation of 1 point around. So if I was here, 15 degrees will snap it so it's flat. Another 15 degrees will snap it so that we have the points at the midsection again. But I just need it right there. Holding that control key is going to make sure that that snaps exactly. So I'm going to hit Q and escape also to clear out my snapping. And now we're ready here. Let's go ahead and subdivide that to continue. So I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to bevel it. And the height on these is 1.6 millimeters. Again, that multiple of 0.8 seems to show up all the time. So I'm going to pull this up exactly 1.6 millimeters. And then I'm going to run, again, my trusty loop slice through here. And then we're noticing 2 problems. Rounding right here, way too loose. Rounding up here, way too loose. So these are the same problem manifested in 2 ways, and we're going to deal with it in 2 ways. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run a loop slice here. Set my count back to 1, my mode to free, and I'm going to pull this in And I'm going to go for about 5%. I'm just going to leave that with a little bit of rounding there. And again, you may want to, as you start here, you may want to click your subdivision level up to 3 or 4 just to get an idea of what you're working on. And that works. Now I'm going to grab this top one, and I'm going to deal with this just by beveling it in. And I'm going to use kind of as a set value for doing this kind of thing where I have a sharp edge and then it goes up into something flat, especially if it's an angon. I'm going to be using this 100 so 1/10 of a millimeter setting quite often. So that way I can keep some uniformity. All right, so we have this pretty much ready, and we want to get a good preview of it. So I'm going to set up my model single view in a particular way that will help me to do that. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to hit the O key to bring up my options, and I'm going to set my visibility, or excuse me, my wireframe overlay to none, so we don't get any wireframe. And under visibility, I'm going to turn off locators, texture locators, and the grid, the work plane. In case I have a backdrop, I'm going to turn that all off. So now I'm left with this really nice clean view of my object, and it makes it a lot easier to come in and see what it is I'm working with. You can also use the gooch tone shading, which I have updated using a different gooch tone. You can do a search on the forums, and there is a replacement. It's very simple to do. So you can also use that to kind of see contours and make sure that everything's flattening out nicely. If you get a constant color, you know that you have a flat surface. So if I, for example, were to take one of these points and move it up, we're going to lose that constant. And it's a pretty subtle gradient at this point, but you can see that there is some gradation now. So you know that that surface isn't flat. But this one now, all one solid color, no gradation, unless you're rotating, obviously, but no gradation. You know that that is a flat solid surface. Okay. All right, so let's get back into modeling here, and we'll look at the bottom side. All right, now with the bottom side, we run into a couple of minor issues. And the first and foremost is that if we just take this bottom section, say, okay, well, we don't need that loop slice around the edge, so let's just take this and bevel it in. This is going to be a big mistake. Let's turn on group polys first of all. So if I bevel in here, let's do our 1.6 millimeters or thereabouts. I'm going to undo this, so I'll just get close. And then I'll bevel up, and we won't go any farther. We'll just do like that. It doesn't matter how many loop slices we add in here. We're never going to get this edge to be sharp. Okay. Now we can come in and do edge weighting on top of our loop slices to sharpen up the subdivision surfaces, but in general, it's just going to become a big pain to get this to work right. So let's undo that, and we'll look at the way that we should have done it. Now, one important thing to remember here, and this is true of a lot of subdivision surface models, is that if you have a couple of edges defining another edge, and you can use them when you go on to make more bevels or attach them to other things with the bridge tool, if you can reuse those same ones, you're generally going to be in pretty good shape. So we're going to use these. The only problem is I'm going to bevel these, and then I'm going to move straight to the scale tool, because if I bevel these, let's select them again. If I bevel these and now just use this, we're going to get overlapping and crossing well before we ever get where we need to go with this. So obviously beveling and using that inset, not going to work. But if we bevel and use the scale tool, which is what we're going to do, we're left with the problem of not being able to tell exactly how far this needs to go in. I mean, granted, you could do the math, but this is going to become problematic. Because as we bevel, or if we scale things with subdivision surfaces, it's going to be always relative to the edges and the points that are around it. So I want to be able to align this with this circle here from the top of my piece, but I can't do that in this mode. So let's undo, and what I'm going to do is I want to keep this selection. So I'm going to get out of poly mode, unsubdivide, and then get back in poly mode. And now if I use my scale tool, I can still see my top here. Now we know that the very outer edge here is going to be the one that is attached to the loop slice around. The middle one is going to be the actual edge we're aiming for, and then this inner edge of this 12-sided polygon is going to be that beveled inset that we'd created. So I want to go in and I want to leave a tiny bit of daylight. So looks like 58.5% is going to do it in this case, because I want to leave a little bit of space so that when I insert a couple of pieces together, they don't overlap each other and cause weird rendering issues. So that pretty much sets us up where we want to be. Now again, I'm going to go to the bevel tool, and this one we're not going to inset anything, so we can just drag straight up. And we know that the height of that button on top is 1.6 millimeters. However, if I go up exactly 1.6 millimeters, again, we end up with these little intrusion problems if we put a couple of pieces together. So just to keep things nice and even, I'm actually going to go up to 1.7 millimeters just to give it a tiny bit of clearance. And that will help keep things working better when we go to render, especially clear pieces. So let's see here. That works pretty well. And now what we want to do is we want to be able to insert another circle into here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my empty mesh layer. I'm going to go again to the basic tab, I'm going to make a cylinder, and I'm going to start this again from the origin and drag out. I still want 12 sides, and this one is only a third the diameter of the outer one. So that is to say that the edges, or the radius of each side to the outer edge is going to be the same as the entire diameter of this one. So do the math, 4.8 divided by 3. Know that this is going to be 1.8 millimeters wide, which is 900 in radius terms. And then I'm going to zero it out on the Z, make sure it's all in good shape, and then I'm going to drag it up right to 1.7 millimeters on the Y, so that I know it's right there. Okay, now before I even move on here, I'm just going to go ahead and rotate this 15 degrees so I know that I'm all set. And I'm going to flip it so it's facing down. Let's subdivide that so it's ready to go. And now we'll go back and prepare the hole for it. So select the center polygon, shift in the up arrow, and cut. And now we'll go down here, cut this one, paste, get that edge, and oops, actually we're not back in Sub-D yet, so let's do this here. Let's go to polys and Sub-D that. We've got some loop slicing to do yet, but this will at least let us attach this. So outer edge and inner edge selected, run our bridge tool, and there we go. You can see since this time I'd already rotated it, it comes out nice and even. There's not that swirling effect. Yeah, and there we go. So again, we're going to have to bevel this one up in order to get it into the right place. So one time we're going up 1.5 millimeters because we just want to meet the top here. And then I'm going to go right in from here and I'm going to bevel in that 100 because I know I'm going to need that, just like I did on the top piece. Now I'm going to select a couple of polys here, a couple of polys here. I'm just making sure they're not touching each other. A couple polys here, a couple polys here. But as long as they're not touching each other, I can run the loop slice on multiple pieces or multiple poly groups at the same time. So now if I run loop slice, set my count to 2, my mode to symmetry, and drag, that's going to sharpen up everything with one fell swoop. So there you have it. There's the first piece. One piece of business that we'll take care of before we move on is actually going to be to UV this thing. And when we UV this, this is not going to be a huge procedure because really we don't need to UV anything but this part, which is exactly what we're going to do. So let's go over to our UV maps. We can see that part is UV'd there, but leaves a lot to be desired. So I'm just going to invert my selection, edit UVs, cut UVs, and I'm going to rename this, oops, not delete, pardon me. I'm going to rename this logo bump. This is the bump where our logo is going to be. And since we're here, let's go ahead and put our little bump mapped logo on here. For copyright reasons, we're not going to use the logo that goes with the company that makes toys that look like this, whose name shall remain nameless, but you and I both know who it is. We're going to use the logo of a company that's more friendly with their rights. So let's go ahead and base. I'm just going to make this one gray, actually. I'm just going to drag it down to a 50% gray so that we got kind of a base plastic color here. And I'm going to add an image map. Load image. And we're going to use this logo. I find it to be a lot friendlier. And it's going to work a lot nicer. Now, one thing we'll notice is that we are kind of overlapping the edges here, and that's actually my fault because I created this piece after building this initially, so I actually need to go in and scale it down a little bit so that it fits better into there. Don't worry, the file that I'm going to include with the videos will be scaled properly, and actually in the next video you'll see it scaled properly. But let's go ahead here, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to change it to bump, and in this case we need the white there, we need it to be higher instead of lower, so I'm going to turn on the invert, and with that as bump, we are ready to go. We'll look at setting up actual textures for this later, but wanted to get this bump map in place before we got going. So I hope this wet your whistle and got you excited to build more, and we got a lot more to build. There are 50 total pieces, or I don't know, 52 pieces I think in the model that we're going to build. Some of them are duplicates, but we're going to look at how to deal with those duplicates and how to deal with the more complex pieces also in a very appropriate manner that will both save us RAM and will save us time, which is always valuable. And we'll get all those built to create. I don't know, I think you can do a boat or a helicopter or a little biplane. I think we're going to do I think we might end up doing all of them. We'll see. But for now, here's this opening piece. Come back in the next video, and we'll start moving on to similar pieces. Thanks, and see you in the next video.